Some of the biggest names in rock left behind children who had to grow up carrying a last name heavier than most people will ever understand. Some of those children joined the family business and forged their own careers in the music industry, while others were not so lucky and suffered at the hands of parents too busy battling their own demons to raise them properly. So what happened to all of them? Let's start with the one name that carries perhaps the most weight in rock history. Frances Bean Cobain, born August 18, 1992, is an American visual artist and model. The only child of Nirvana frontman Kurt Cobain and Hole frontwoman Courtney Love. Before she could walk, her life was already tabloid fodder. Before she could speak, the world had opinions about her. And before she turned 2, her father was gone. On April 1, 1994, when she was 20 months old, Frances visited her father at the Exodus Recovery Center, a rehab facility in Marina del Rey, California, where they played together. This was the last time she saw her father alive. A week later, he was found dead at his home in Seattle. What followed was a childhood shaped not by bedtime stories and birthday cakes, but by custody battles, restraining orders, and a mother whose own struggles with addiction were played out in the harshest spotlight imaginable. The chaos actually began before Frances was even born. Before her birth, rumors suggested that her mother used heroin during the pregnancy. This scandal intensified when Vanity Fair published an article which alleged that Love admitted to using heroin even after learning of her pregnancy. Love and Kurt Cobain maintained that Vanity Fair took her words out of context. Eventually, Child Welfare Services launched an investigation into their parenting abilities. The investigation was ultimately dismissed, but not without significant legal wrangling, and Cobain being removed from her parents' custody for a short time, beginning when she was just 2 weeks old. 2 weeks old, that's how early the system stepped in. And that pattern of instability would echo throughout Frances Bean's formative years. After Kurt's death, Frances was raised by her mother, aunts, and paternal grandmother. She spent her early years in Seattle and Los Angeles, and was placed in her grandmother's care for a time after her mother's drug-related arrest in October 2003. Love regained custody in 2005, but the damage was being done in layers, grief upon grief, instability upon instability. Then, in December 2009, things reached a breaking point. A California Superior Court in Los Angeles appointed Wendy O'Connor, her paternal grandmother, and Kimberly Cobain, her father's sister, as Frances's temporary co-guardians. A judge issued a related temporary restraining order prohibiting Love from having any direct or indirect contact with her daughter. Imagine that, a restraining order between a mother and her teenage daughter. Frances even excluded her mother from her 2014 wedding. The rift between them was that deep, that raw, that entrenched in years of accumulated hurt. But here's where the story takes an unexpected turn. Frances didn't spiral. She didn't crash and burn the way so many expected. The real story turned out differently. Frances found her place in art studios, not on stage. Pencils and paint replaced microphones and crowds. She attended Bard College, where she studied art. She pursued visual expression as her medium of choice, deliberately stepping away from the instrument that defined her father. When asked about growing up and not being particularly interested in Nirvana's music, Frances told Rolling Stone that she would have felt more awkward if she'd been a fan. She said she was around 15 when she realized her father was inescapable. Even in a car with the radio on, there was her dad. That realization that your dead parent is everywhere, omnipresent, frozen in time, is something most people cannot comprehend. Frances herself reflected on it. The mythology and romanticism that surrounds Kurt exists because he's 27 forever. The shelf life of an artist isn't particularly long. Kurt has gotten to icon status because he will never age. He will always be that relevant in that time and always be beautiful. She became an executive producer on the HBO documentary about her father's life, Kurt Cobain, Montage of Heck. But she later denounced the film, saying the representation of her father was not what she wanted it to be. However, there was a silver lining buried inside that project. It was actually the documentary that helped heal Frances's fractured relationship with her mother. Frances and Courtney were able to mend fences once they watched Montage of Heck together. "We were kind of spooning on this big couch, and we were both crying," she told Rolling Stone. Frances also confirmed that she and her mother have resolved a lot of our issues. "I grew up, and she grew up too." Frances also battled her own demons. On February 13, 2018, she announced that she was celebrating 2 years of sobriety, writing, "The fact that I'm sober isn't really public knowledge, decidedly and deliberately. But I think it's more important to put aside my fear about being judged or misunderstood or typecast as one specific thing." When she turned 30, Frances got candid about a period in her 20s when she wasn't sure she'd survive. She wrote, 30. I made it. Honestly, 20-year-old Frances wasn't sure that was going to happen. At the time, an intrinsic sense of deep self-loathing dictated by insecurity, destructive coping mechanisms, and more trauma than my body or brain knew how to handle informed how I saw myself in the world. She then revealed that a near-death experience on a plane catapulted her toward running at life with radical gratitude. That plane incident was real and documented. On September 30th, 2017, Frances was aboard Air France Flight 066 when the aircraft experienced an engine explosion, forcing the pilot to make an emergency landing. Ironically, a brush with death on a commercial flight gave Frances the will to live fully. Her personal life eventually found stability in the most unlikely of pairings. In 2021, Frances began dating skateboarder Riley Hawk, the son of Tony Hawk. They married in Los Angeles on October 7, 2023, with REM lead singer Michael Stipe, Frances's godfather, officiating the ceremony. And then in September 2024, the story came full circle. The couple welcomed their first child, a son named Ronan Walker Cobain Hawk, on September 17, 2024. Frances shared the news on Instagram, expressing joy while keeping the child's privacy intact. Had he lived, Kurt Cobain would have been a first-time grandfather. People magazine reported that Frances also receives nearly $100,000 a month from her father's estate. She controls the publicity rights to her father's name and image. The weight of that responsibility, being the gatekeeper of one of rock's most sacred legacies, cannot be overstated. But Frances has carried it with a steadiness that defied every prediction made about her when she was a toddler being shuffled between courtrooms and grandparents' homes. If Frances Bean Cobain's story is about defying expectations, then the story of John Lennon's sons is about navigating something arguably more complex, being the children of a man the entire world loved, but who wasn't always there for his own family. John Lennon left behind a huge legacy when he was assassinated in 1980 at the age of 40. Music he made with the Beatles, his thriving solo career, and his two sons. Those two sons, Julian and Sean, had wildly different experiences of their father, different mothers, different upbringings, and ultimately different relationships with the ghost of John Lennon. But both of them have spent their entire lives navigating what it means to carry that name. Let's start with Julian. Julian Charles John Lennon, born April 8, 1963, is an English musician, photographer, author, and philanthropist. He is the son of Beatles member John Lennon and his first wife, Cynthia. He was the first child, the one who arrived during the height of Beatlemania, the one whose childhood drawing of a friend named Lucy would inspire one of his father's most famous songs. Julian inspired Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds, whose lyrics describe a watercolor he had painted of his friend Lucy O'Donnell from nursery school, surrounded by stars. Another composition inspired by him was the lullaby Good Night, the closing song of the White Album. And perhaps most poignantly, Paul McCartney wrote Hey Jude to console Julian over his parents' divorce. Originally called Hey Jules, McCartney changed the name because he thought Jude was an easier name to sing. Think about that for a moment. Three of the most iconic Beatles songs, deeply embedded in the cultural consciousness of the entire planet, exist because of this boy. And yet, the man who wrote those songs about his son would go on to largely abandon him. When Julian was 5 years old, in 1968, his parents divorced following his father's infidelity with Japanese multimedia artist Yoko Ono. John Lennon married Ono on March 20, 1969. To little Julian, the saga was primarily about his father abandoning him and his mother, Cynthia Lennon. It was something he failed to make sense of, even in his later years. I know bringing up a kid is tough, but I cannot understand how anyone, not just Dad, can walk away from that. He told The Telegraph in 1998, after his parents' divorce, Julian had almost no contact with his father until the early 1970s, when, at the request of his father's then-girlfriend May Pang, he began to visit his father regularly. Those visits represented some of the happiest memories Julian has of John. John Lennon bought Julian a Gibson Les Paul guitar and a drum machine for Christmas 1973, and encouraged his interest in music by showing him some chords. Then came December 8, 1980. News of John's murder at the hands of Mark David Chapman devastated the entire world. Julian was 17 at the time of the tragedy. In a 2020 interview on BBC Radio, Julian recalled the last conversation he had with his father. Dad and I had been getting on and speaking a lot more on the phone, when I was sort of 15, 16, and 17. I was living at Mom's house and finishing up at school. I remember him playing Starting Over the phone. He just mixed it. That was it. The last thing Julian heard from his father was a song played over the telephone, and then silence. What followed was arguably one of the cruelest footnotes in rock and roll history. Lennon's father excluded him from his will, but created a trust of just £100,000 to be shared between Julian and his half-brother Sean. Julian sued his father's estate and in 1996 reached a settlement agreement, reportedly worth £20 million. But the financial wound cut even deeper than the numbers suggest. Even more painful was the fact that Julian had to use the money he received to retrieve memories of his father, including the postcards exchanged between them, after Yoko auctioned off John's personal belongings following his death. "I'm buying his stuff back with his money, which is absolutely insane," he said. "I've been dealt a very interesting hand." Julian went on to say something that captured the fundamental contradiction of his relationship with his father in devastating simplicity. He told the Times of London, "Mum was more about love than Dad. He sang about it, he spoke about it, but he never really gave it, at least not to me as his son. The man who wrote All You Need Is Love, the man who told the world to imagine. That man couldn't show love to his firstborn son." Despite all of that, Julian forged his own path. He started a music career in 1984 with the album Veloute, has held exhibitions of fine art photography, written several children's books, produced the environmental documentary Whale Dreamers, and in 2007 founded the White Feather Foundation, addressing environmental and humanitarian issues. And remarkably, Julian found a way to forgive. In an interview with CBS News in 2009, Julian stated, "I realized if I continued to feel that anger and bitterness towards my dad, I would have a constant cloud hanging over my head my whole life. After recording the song Lucy, it felt right to fulfill the circle, forgive Dad, put the pain, anger, and bitterness in the past, and focus and appreciate the good things. Writing is therapy for me, and for the first time in my life, I'm actually feeling it and believing it. It also has allowed me to actually embrace Dad and the Beatles." Julian Lennon has never married or had children. He has said in the past that his difficult relationship with his father had discouraged him from having long-term relationships. Now, Sean Ono Lennon's experience was the mirror image of Julian's, but that didn't make it easier. Sean Taro Ono Lennon, born October 9, 1975, is a British and American musician. He is the son of John Lennon and Yoko Ono, and half-brother of Julian Lennon. He was born on his father's 35th birthday, a detail that carries its own weight. After Sean's birth, John took a hiatus from music and became a stay-at-home dad. John was murdered on December 8, 1980. So, unlike Julian, Sean actually had his father present during his earliest years. John poured into Sean what he had withheld from Julian. But the cost was that Sean lost his father at an age when those memories were still gossamer thin. Sean took a decidedly different approach to carrying the Lennon name. As the son of one of the most influential pop culture icons of the 20th century, comparisons to his father followed him persistently. And unlike Julian, Sean has been willing to see it as an advantage worth embracing. "I have all this attention, and instead of complaining about it, I want to use the situation for a positive goal," he told Rolling Stone. Over the course of his career, Sean has been a member of the bands Cibo Matto, The Ghost of a Saber-Toothed Tiger, the Claypool Lennon Delirium, and his parents' group, Plastic Ono Band. He has released 3 solo albums and produced numerous albums for various artists. And then there's the moment that proved the Lennon legacy might just stretch into a third generation. On April 12, 2024, James McCartney, son of Paul McCartney, released a song called Primrose Hill, with Sean being credited as a composer and songwriter, marking their first collaboration. Lennon-McCartney, together again, just one generation removed. Despite their radically different childhoods, the two Lennon brothers found each other. "We've never had a fight in our life," Julian once stated to Esquire. While the brothers didn't grow up together as they had different mothers, they remained close and recently got together to reminisce about their father and his legacy. Julian shared photos of himself with Sean at the Dakota, captioning the snaps of their dinner. "A goodnight kiss for my brother after spending the evening with him, having a lil dinner and chatting the night away at the Dakota. Something we rarely get to do, thankful." The Dakota. The building where their father lived. The building where their father died. And now, the building where his 2 sons sit down to dinner and try to make peace with it all. In the summer of 2017, rock music lost 2 of its most powerful voices. Within 2 months of each other, and the children left behind were bound not just by grief, but by a personal connection between their fathers that made the whole thing feel unbearably intertwined. Chris Cornell, 52, was pronounced dead on May 18, 2017, after being found unresponsive in a Detroit hotel room. Hours after performing a concert with Soundgarden, preliminary autopsy results showed the singer hanged himself. Cornell left behind 3 children, Christopher, Tony, and Lily. His bandmate Matt Cameron of Soundgarden addressed the children directly at the funeral, saying, "Losing my brother and artistic soulmate will always pale in comparison." Then, exactly 2 months later, on what would have been Chris Cornell's 53rd birthday, the unthinkable happened again. On July 20, 2017, at the age of 41, Chester Bennington was found dead at his home in Palos Verdes Estates, California. Authorities ruled his death as suicide by hanging. The connection between the two men made this doubly devastating. Bennington was a close friend of Chris Cornell. They became friends during a tour they shared in the mid-2000s. The chemistry between the two strengthened during the 2007-2008 Project Revolution tour, when Bennington joined Cornell on stage to sing Temple of the Dog's Hunger Strike, and then Cornell joined Linkin Park to sing Crawling. Bennington was also the godfather of Cornell's son, Christopher. Let that sink in. Chester Bennington was the godfather of Chris Cornell's son, and then Chester took his own life on Chris's birthday. Following Cornell's suicide in May 2017, Bennington wrote an open letter to him on Instagram, stating that he could not imagine a world without Cornell in it. His bandmate Shinoda noted that Bennington was very emotional. When the band performed One More Light in Cornell's honor on Jimmy Kimmel Live, and Bennington could not finish singing the song during rehearsal. On May 26, 2017, a week after his performance on Kimmel, Bennington sang Leonard Cohen's Hallelujah at Cornell's funeral in Los Angeles. Less than 2 months later, he was gone himself. Bennington left behind 6 children from various relationships. His widow, Talinda Bennington, stepped into a role that no one wants, the one who has to explain to children why their father isn't coming home. After Bennington's death, Talinda launched a campaign called 320 Changes Direction, in honor of her husband, to help break the stigma surrounding mental illness. The Cornell children, meanwhile, had their mother Vicky fighting fiercely on their behalf. Cornell's family questioned the ruling of suicide by hanging. Vicky Cornell became a prominent voice in the conversation about prescription medication and its role in her husband's death, claiming that an antidepressant called Ativan was to blame for the incident. For Christopher Cornell, who had Chester Bennington as his godfather, the losses were layered in a way that is almost incomprehensible for any child. He lost his father, then he lost the man chosen to protect and guide him in his father's absence, both in the same manner, both within weeks of each other. Both Chris Cornell and Chester Bennington struggled their entire lives with emotional stress and substance abuse. Both of them took their trauma and used it to create music that resonated with an entire generation. While they are both missed incredibly, their pain was turned to beauty through music and helped countless people through their own struggles. The families of both men have worked to ensure that the legacy left behind is one of hope rather than despair. The annual memorials, the tributes, the foundations, they all serve a dual purpose. They honor the artists, and they remind the children that their fathers mattered, not just to them, but to millions. July 20 is a doubly sad day for many rock fans, as it marks the anniversary of Linkin Park singer Chester Bennington's death, as well as the birthday of his late friend Chris Cornell. Both musicians died of suicide months apart in 2017. The intersection of celebration and mourning that defines their lives. Some families seem haunted by loss, not metaphorically, not dramatically, but in a relentless cascading way that makes you wonder whether grief can actually be inherited. Tragedy has sadly haunted the children of Paula Yates. Although not a rock star herself, the Welsh TV presenter was involved with 2 big names in the world of music: Bob Geldof of the Boomtown Rats and Michael Hutchence of INX. She had 3 daughters with Geldof before they divorced. She gave birth to a daughter, Heavenly Hirani Tiger Lily, with Hutchence in 1996. But in 1997, Hutchence died by suicide. The next few years of Yates' life were unsurprisingly hellish. Tiger Lily was barely a year old when her father, Michael Hutchence, the charismatic frontman of INXS, one of Australia's biggest rock exports, was found dead in a Sydney hotel room in November 1997. He was 37. Paula Yates denied all claims that Hutchence's death was intentional, and claimed that Geldof had previously threatened her. She spent time in psychiatric treatment and lost custody of her daughters with Geldof after a suicide attempt. While fighting for custody, she discovered that the man she thought was her father actually was not, and that her biological father had passed away months prior. Then, in September 2000, Paula Yates herself died of an accidental heroin overdose. She had lost both her parents before she started school. Bob Geldof, Yates' first husband, stepped in and adopted Tiger Lily, raising her alongside his own 3 daughters, Fifi Trixabel, Peaches, and Pixie. But the curse, if you can call it that, wasn't finished, was found dead from a heroin overdose at age 25. She left behind 2 young sons, father at 1, mother at 4, adoptive sister at 17, each loss compounding the last, each one stripping away another layer. Tiger Lily has lived an extremely private life since then. She has rarely spoken publicly and has stayed almost entirely out of the media. The silence is itself a statement, a refusal to let the machinery of fame, which consumed both her parents, consume her too. And then there is the Presley line, where the echoes are equally relentless. Lisa Marie Presley, born February 1st, 1968, was the daughter of singer and actor Elvis Presley and actress Priscilla Presley. She became the sole heir to her father's estate, following the deaths of her grandfather and great-grandmother. She was also known for her marriage to Michael Jackson. Lisa Marie was 9 years old when Elvis died in 1977. She inherited Graceland. She inherited the name. She inherited the fortune. And she inherited the gravitational pull of a legacy so large that it warped everything around it. Lisa Marie Presley had 4 children: Riley Keough, Benjamin Keough, Harper Lockwood, and Finley Lockwood. Riley Keough, born in 1989, became an actress and filmmaker in her own right. She starred in films like Mad Max, Fury Road, and The Lodge, and won acclaim for her work. Benjamin Keough, born in 1992, bore a striking resemblance to his grandfather Elvis. So much so that it was unnerving to people who knew the king. In July 2020, Benjamin died by suicide at the age of 27. The same age as Kurt Cobain, the same age as Jimi Hendrix, the same age as Jim Morrison, Lisa Marie was shattered by Benjamin's death. She kept his body at the family home for 2 months, unable to let go. Then, on January 12, 2023, Lisa Marie Presley herself died, following cardiac arrest after a small bowel obstruction, a complication from bariatric surgery. She was 54. Her memoir, From Here to the Great Unknown, completed by her daughter Riley Keough, was published posthumously in October 2024. Riley finished her mother's book. She carried the story to completion, just as her mother had carried the story of Elvis, just as Elvis's music had carried an entire generation. Lisa Marie's youngest children, twins Harper and Finley Lockwood, were just 14 years old when she passed away in 2023. 14. The same twins who had been fostering puppies with their mother during the pandemic, whose birthday celebrations Lisa Marie had posted about with such warmth and normalcy, suddenly motherless, joining a lineage of Presley descendants, defined as much by their losses as by their legacy. Riley Keough now serves as the trustee of the Presley estate. She is in effect doing what Priscilla Presley did before her, holding the family together while the world watches and the vultures circle. Not every child of a dead rock star ends up in the headlines for tragedy. Some of them pick up instruments. Some of them build foundations. Some of them simply walk away from it all. Being raised by a rock star would seem to be every teenager's dream, unless you happen to be that teenager. Then things can get weird. Trixie Garcia had her first psychedelic experience when she was 1.5. A bag of mushrooms had been left sitting out. Her parents, the late Grateful Dead singer Jerry Garcia and the prototypical hippie chick Mountain Girl, were not particularly alarmed. Most of the kids in the scene had some early dosing incident, Trixie recalled. Jerry Garcia died in 1995. Trixie went on to become a painter living in the Bay Area, navigating a childhood that veered between Grateful Dead tours and Oregon communes. David Bowie's children offer yet another angle on what it means to inherit a rock star's DNA without inheriting their demons. Bowie's son, Duncan Jones, born Zowie Bowie, became a film director, helming critically acclaimed science fiction films like Moon and Source Code. He carved out a career that had nothing to do with music and everything to do with his own creative vision. When Bowie died of liver cancer in January 2016, Duncan was already established on his own terms, a luxury that many children of dead rock stars never get. Bowie's daughter, Alexandria Zara Jones, born in 2000, was just 15 when her father passed. she has remained largely out of the public eye, protected by the careful privacy that Bowie and her mother, Iman, maintained throughout her childhood. Then there's the question of Freddie Mercury, who died of AIDS-related complications in 1991. Mercury had no biological children, but his influence extended to a chosen family: his longtime partner Jim Hutton, his ex-girlfriend Mary Austin, to whom he left his mansion, and the band members who became the custodians of his memory. The absence of children in Mercury's story is itself notable, because it means Queen's legacy has been managed by collaborators rather than heirs. Avoiding the estate battles and custody fights that plagued other rock legacies, the pattern that emerges across all of these stories is unmistakable. The children of dead rock stars rarely get to be just children. Their grief is public property. Their inheritance comes with strings. Their last names open doors, but also lock them into narratives they didn't choose. Francis Bean Cobain chose art. Julian Lennon chose forgiveness. Sean Lennon chose to embrace his father's shadow rather than flee from it. Tiger Lily Hutchins chose silence. Riley Keough chose to finish her mother's story. The Cornell and Bennington children are still writing theirs. What connects all of them is the same fundamental question: how do you build a life when the person who gave you that life became a legend by losing theirs? There is no single answer. Some found peace, some found purpose, some are still searching. But each of them, in their own way, has done something their parents couldn't. They survived the weight of the name they were born with. And for some of them, that survival is the greatest rock and roll story never told. If you or someone you know is struggling, please reach out to the 988 Suicide and Crisis Lifeline by calling or texting 988